corporate leaders are shocked when they're riddled with the imposter syndrome that oftentimes shows up when you're new to any elevation, right?
Mhm.
Like we think because we've beat that maybe in our early days when we actually were brand spanking new in a profession, that we're never
Yeah.
ever going to experience that again. And I feel like that's something I really want to normalize for people is that that is going to show up like clockwork every time you reach that next level. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project, changing the way the game is played. This podcast helps purpose-driven leaders unlock their highest potential so that they can play their biggest impact game. Welcome back to the Leadership Launchpad Project, changing the way this game is being played. We are so fired up to be in this locker room this morning because we have got one of our teammates, Lauren Williams, who's going to join us at the helm to talk all about her first year in the role of assistant coach in the new women's professional women's hockey league, the PWHL. She's been at the helm all year with the New York Sirens. Lauren, thank
Hi, everyone.
you. It's always fun when we get to riff with you. What an honor and a privilege to get behind the gates of our very own high performance leadership coach, but to put you on the hot seat and really hear about what this whole legacy year has been like for you. I'm calling it a legacy year because you can see from my background, this really is the legacy play for you, coming from the same world that I came from in terms of women's hockey and having played for so long.
Mhm.
And now you get to integrate everything that we work on in our corporate locker rooms, right, Leanne, with our
Mhm.
leaders in terms of how we integrate leadership in the context of coaching. So let's talk
Ah,
about your first year in the league, Lou. What was that like?
oh my gosh. To sum it up in a few words, inspiring, overwhelming, exciting. Uh, the shock and awe factor was absolutely there, challenging, exhausting. But it's the best. I don't know. It's the best way to put it. It's been a real whirlwind. There's certainly been moments where I've had to like take a step back and really appreciate it for what it is, and think back to my experience as a professional athlete and remind myself that like, wow, this is what it's all about. And there are times where you forget what it's all about,
Mhm.
and being able to, on the bench when you're in a stadium full of, 15,000 people, take a step back and see the little girls with signs and all of that, like to remind yourself that this is what it's all about,
Mhm.
um, was really important for me this year. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's been a whirlwind, and I've loved it. It's been great, and then there's been days where you're like, okay, buckle up. But yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing I want to hear about most. Like, I know for me, when I'm watching these clips and I'm seeing all these little girls holding up these signs in the stands and just like seeing places like the Bell Center sold out, like,
Mhm.
what is that like for that little girl inside of you who first went on this mission and never really realizing that this was maybe even going to be a possibility for us in this lifetime?
Yeah, I mean, when I was that young, I didn't have female role models to go and watch. I didn't know that the NCAA even existed when I was younger. Being from Windsor, like I just didn't have the exposure to it. So when I think about my experience as a young girl, looking up to players in the NHL and not really obviously seeing anyone like me who was doing it, and then
Hmm.
hearing all of the like little side comments about how girls hockey isn't the same and it's not as good. um if I think that that dialogue is dying out, and it's great, and these young girls are getting to see exactly what they can do, and just the idea that you can actually make a living playing professional women's hockey and have a career beyond your early to mid 20s is amazing. I think the little girl in me is both very jealous and very excited.
And
Yeah.
you're bridging two worlds, really, bridging obviously the world where you're coaching hockey, and then you got the world where you're coaching with us at Elite, in terms of the corporate leadership stuff. So
Mm.
what's that like trying to, sort of manage? Obviously, there's going to be, a lot of things that you're going to be able to use from the corporate locker room in the sports locker room, and I don't know if it's vice versa. So tell us a little bit what it's like to bridge into, in my mind, they seem like very different worlds, but maybe there's a lot of similarities. But
Mm.
yeah, what's that like?
Well, it's been really interesting, and I would say that they're more similar than they are different because now, like at this level, sport is a business.
Mm,
So we're looking at, players and contracts and working alongside our general manager to figure out, who's the best fit and how are we going to shuffle some puzzle pieces around and what is this going to look like next year. So you don't have the same the consistency that college brings you, right? Where you have a player, you invest in that player for 4 years, and typically the trajectory looks like that, right? Where you get a new group of people every year, and then you have that group for 4 years. You've got players that might be with your organization for a year. You might bring them in and sign them in on a 10-day contract. You might sign somebody for 3 years. And being able to manage all of that, not only from like a personality standpoint and a leadership standpoint, but also from a skill development standpoint, because every player that comes through your organization, you want to help them be the best version of themselves, because the best version of themselves is going to bring your team the best version of them, which is going to put the best product on the ice, which is going to make more money. So that's a really interesting dynamic. So bringing in the leadership coaching and the mental performance work has been interesting. And I will say that we're still figuring out the best way to do it. We've had some team meetings on, giving and receiving feedback that the players have found really valuable, and honestly, our coaching staff has also felt valuable. And we've had some meetings on what your why is, like why is it that you're doing what you're doing, and being able to bring those couple of things to the forefront has helped. But I find that it happens very organically in one-on-one conversations where, you have an athlete that might be struggling with confidence because they're moving down the lineup. And it's a player who's never played down the lineup because at this level, they are all the best, right? They're
Mhm.
coming from college teams where they were the best forward, they were getting the most minutes, they were getting the most external validation. So maybe some of their mental habits aren't great, and then they come here and all of a sudden those external validators are either not consistent or they're not there altogether.
Mhm.
So it's been really interesting in that sense.
The high achiever mindset was exposed,
Mm.
which is what we
mm,
talk about when you get to this top 1% of any high pressure, high stakes environment, similar to the corporate ladder, right? It's like a lot of them are used to being those all-star individual contributors. And then all of a sudden they get thrust into stadiums with like 20,000 people around, and now they're not on the first lineup, right? They're on the fourth lineup. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, were you seeing a lot of what we see in those corporate ladder locker rooms in terms of the maladaptive high achiever mindset strategies?
Yeah, I mean, as coaches, it's interesting, right? Because we don't see everything. You're not in the locker room with the players. But
Mm,
what you do start to see is little things that start to happen on the ice that are uncharacteristic of that player and who you know them to be and what you know they're capable of.
mhm,
So, for example, we have a first year player who in college was dominant in her league, very offensive, very gifted, super athletic.
mhm,
And part of her skill set was just being like what I call slippery on the ice. Like she was really hard to contain. She rolled off of pressure really well. She moved the puck efficiently. And she was also really fast in the college game. And, the speed elevates here, the physicality elevates here, the overall skill elevates here.
mhm.
And all of a sudden, when you're feeling unsure of yourself as a hockey player, I'm sure you know this, Susan, like you tend to to get away from the things that bring you success, especially when you know, moving your feet and moving the puck bring you success. So she started to hang on to it too long. You can see that self-doubt creeping in. She's not moving her feet as much, which results in, you know, negative outcomes like turnovers and getting stuck in our end, and now she's feeling like she's not producing and all these different things. So it kind of snowballs from there. um I would say, like, in the corporate world, you'll often see or hear from people that, like, they're working overtime, they're not paying attention to their kids as much as they want to, or they feel like they can't shut off their work brain.
Mm-hmm.
Which when I finally got to talk to this player one on one, that was one of the things that she said. She's like, I the only thing I'm thinking about is hockey, and I can't shut it off, and it's stressing me out because hockey's not going well.
Mm-hmm.
So yes and no, I would say. I think there are a lot of similarities, but as a coach, you don't get to see everything that the players are doing, which is a good thing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, that pressure really does push us out of our flow, right? And it's so interesting when we're working with corporate leaders because they're like, "Well, we've been doing this for 20 years sometimes, and they're surprised that that level of arousal or even hyper arousal can actually make them lose track of their sweet spot, right? Let's talk about
Mm,
how that showed up for you in terms of the self-leadership piece, because you've been in the game most of your lifetime. And here you are for the first year at the helm, right?
mhm.
Experiencing some of that next level pressure yourself. Did any of that show up in your experience?
Oh my God, it shows up every other week, I feel like. Um, yeah, I mean, being a young coach in general, right? So, this is only my fourth year coaching full time, which, you know, if you look at a career trajectory, it's a pretty steep one.
Mm-hmm.
So I recognize that I'm new to the game, and I've always known that I am not the most technical hockey player. I never was. And I'm not the most technical scope or coach. Like,
Yes.
that's not where my strength necessarily lies. It's a skill that I'm building on a daily basis. But at the same time, I do have areas where I can be very technical. I just have to lean into those a little bit more. What my strength is in communication. I'm really good at communicating my thoughts. Like in one-on-one video, for example, I'm good at breaking down small concepts, helping players feel seen and understood, and opening up a more collaborative approach with players, which at this level, when you're working with experts, like, they're all professional athletes, they know what they're doing. I don't need to teach them how to play the game anymore. It really is all about collaboration. But at this level, the gut instinct is to get super technical
Mm.
because all of these athletes are so friggin' good at what they do. The and all the coaches are so good at what they do. It's really easy for a lot of them to fall into that, like, super technical piece of,
Mm-hmm.
like, what skills are we using, what systems are working, what systems aren't working. And I had a conversation with our head coach the other day who said, you know, one of the coolest things that he ever heard someone say was, all of the systems work and they also don't work. It depends on how it's communicated and the buy-in that you get from your team.
Mm-hmm.
So where I've been, you know, I would say kind of battling in this uncomfort zone is the natural inclination to lean into the super technical side of the sport where I don't feel most comfortable. And as a result of that, feeling disconnected from the stuff that I'm really good at.
Mm. And how
But
did you, like, when did you start to become aware that you were doing that? Like, was it right from the very beginning, or did you kind of like at some point take a step back and realize that this was happening?
I would say it more so really started creeping up probably a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. So, like, well into the season. And I think the reason for that is because early on I was very comfortable with the fact that I wasn't going to know everything and that it was going
Mhm.
to be a development year. And all of a sudden I started to have this idea of like, no, I should be good by now. I've been learning for 3 months. Yeah, you should be cooked and ready to go.
There's the high achiever mindset.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think that I should be at a certain place right now. It's so interesting. I can totally relate because it poses as the voice of like wisdom and reason and logic, right? It's like,
Oh,
and
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And as the season winds down and you get closer to playoffs and everyone starts looking at the standings and what things look like, what games you need to win versus which ones you don't. That voice that said like you don't know what you're doing, you shouldn't be here,
Mm,
started to get a lot louder. And yeah, I like, and it's crazy because there were moments where I shouldn't say it's crazy, it actually just makes perfect sense. But my brain was really able to find moments in my experience that backed that up. Whether
Mm,
it was like getting in front of the board and not explaining a drill well, which happens to everybody,
mm,
um, or, being on the bench and feeling like I wasn't offering any valuable insight. Um, yeah, my brain was able to find those examples of like, see, look, you don't know what you're doing. So yeah, that voice started to get really loud. I started to do all the mental calculations of like, if I'm uncomfortable, is my ability level at the level that it needs to be to match that? Or am I totally in over my head? There were moments where I felt lost, and yeah, I think it's normal to experience that. But it was a great reminder for me to get back into some of the things that I know that I'm really good at. Um, but then again, you're navigating that within a team, and you can't just go off on your own and do
mhm.
your own thing. So,
mm,
learning to advocate for what I know that I'm good at, and learning to advocate for designating some time to do that work
mhm.
was big and helpful, but also not easy. So yeah.
It makes you so relatable though to what the players are experiencing. Like I think that it's
Mm,
so interesting to me how, corporate leaders are shocked when they're riddled with the imposter syndrome that oftentimes shows up when you're new to any elevation, right?
Mhm.
Like we think because we've beat that maybe in our early days when we actually were brand spanking new in a profession that we're
mm,
never ever going to experience that again. And I feel like that's something I really want to normalize for people is that that is going to show up like clockwork every time you reach that next level, right, ladies?
Mhm.
mm.
That imposter syndrome, I feel like it must be also what the players are experiencing. Like, who are we to be playing in front of 20 some odd thousand, fans? Because again, it's like so new for all of us to have that type of visibility and exposure. Is that
Mhm.
something that you were talking about in your locker rooms, either with your fellow coaches or with the athletes themselves?
Well, it's interesting, and yes, I have said those exact words before, um, about some of our players' behaviors at different, spots in the season and performances and how it relates to that. But I remember sitting down with our coaching group thinking like I could easily see how receiving feedback in this moment would be really difficult, right? Because if you're a player who, maybe is new to this league, or even a veteran, right? If you're new to the league, you're thinking like, holy cow, this is my shot. I'm a
Mhm.
rookie. I've got to figure it out. If I want to get another contract, if I want to continue to make this my living, I've got to be the best all the time. And if that's what you're thinking, receiving feedback in the moment is like, oh my gosh, if I'm not doing something right, then all of that is in jeopardy. And if you're a vet, you're thinking, holy cow, like we're finally here. We worked for so long to get this league. I suffered through X many seasons, not getting paid to play, not having health insurance, not knowing what I was going to be doing the next year. And now I have a livable wage. I've got an apartment stipend. I've got, sponsorships, all these other things. And yeah, when is the ground gonna fall out from underneath my feet? Right. So all of those things come into play when I think when you're talking to an athlete who's in this kind of new space, and it is new for everybody. It's only the second year in the league, but it comes out in unique ways that can be very frustrating for coaches because players get defensive. But then they tell you on the other side of it, well, I really, really want feedback. Like I want to get coached because so many of these veteran players haven't had consistent coaching. And then you go to coach them and they're resistant to it. And it, like as a coach, it can be super frustrating. But when you get curious about why, it makes total sense.
How does one navigate that as a leader? I feel like that's something that is super relatable for corporate folks, right? Like we talk about this in our conflict management locker rooms all the time. People are so surprised by the defensiveness that they experience when they're just trying to help their people grow and optimize their potential. So
Yeah.
I imagine it's a lot of the same shtick in terms of how that manifests in an athletic locker room. But how have you been able to navigate that challenge in terms of the players' defensiveness?
Yeah, I think for my experience and some of the coaches that I've worked and talked with, the difficulty there is keeping your brain from going to like they don't respect me, they don't trust me, they don't want to hear from me. So like that ego driven piece of it's me, not something going on with them is the hardest piece to check. Because I know for myself and again my high achiever limiting belief system patterns, if I'm trying to give feedback to somebody and like let's say they blow me off or they disagree or they get argumentative, my immediate thought is they don't trust me, they don't respect me, they think I don't know what I'm doing. And I've certainly heard the same conversation coming from other people. So being able to check that feeling, which can take you on a wild roller coaster of feelings and thoughts that are not helpful and would make me just go quiet for the rest of the game. Being able to check that and go, okay, yeah, no, it's not all about me. Like get curious about the behavior that's popping up. And you don't have time necessarily to have this long conversation with a player in game. But what you can do is just say, okay, like try to give them the feedback there. They're not open to receive it right now. I'm going to bookmark this and come back to it later. And the nice thing about coaching is that you have video with players after. So like sometimes what I'll do is I'll write a note about what time I was having this conversation with the athlete at. And then I'll go back and find the video and say like, okay, like what were they? This is what they were saying. Can I see that in whatever this clip is? Likelihood, yes, I can. And then this is what I was talking about. Is that also accurate? And then you can come together and have a more informed conversation about it. And hopefully their shields are lowered a little bit because they're not in the high stress environment of a game anymore. And then you can have that conversation with them about, again, giving and receiving feedback and reminding them that, like, look, if I'm giving you feedback, it's because I care. It's because I want to understand your thought process. And I have an iPad with me on the bench. And a couple players said like, yeah, well, it's easy to see that when you're looking at it on an iPad and you're not in the game. And I said, absolutely. That's the point. And I'm not saying that you should have done this differently because I'm seeing it play out from a bird's eye view. But what I am showing you is the different options. And that's the best part about having this in front of you. It's not to say like you did this wrong. It's, hey, you made this decision with all the tools that you had at your disposal at the time, under the stress that you were under. And also, here's your other options if that didn't work out.
Yeah.
It's totally normal to be triggered. That is the most human aspect of leadership, is that we are all going to get triggered in our defense systems no matter what. We're all going to get triggered into our imposter syndrome the higher we climb in our performance ascension no matter what. But it's understanding that we have choice in terms of how we respond.
Yeah.
versus choosing to continue to stay in that reactive pattern of behavior that I feel like is the difference maker here.
So, Lauren, how do you coach yourself? Obviously, we've talked about, the pressure, the greater visibility that you've had this year. Obviously, we talked about some limiting beliefs that popped up for you. So what are your go-tos in terms of like, okay, I gotta manage my mindset. I've got to get myself, sort of back into my sweet spot. What do you turn to and what do you do?
Um, when it comes to the limiting beliefs, I have gotten really good at having an internal conversation of like, is this really true?
Mhm.
And when I struggle with that, so like, let's say it's a pretty pervasive limiting belief, I call my mom. Like, my mom is part of she's like the pillar of my support network that I know I can just, I can call and say like, Mom, I think I'm terrible at my job. And she'll be the first person to go, okay, whoa, let's break this down a little bit. So I mean, calling someone that you trust is
Mhm.
huge. That's what I do. If it is more technical, I am not afraid to, you know, put it out there. Hey, I don't understand why we're doing this. Whether that's with one of the coaches that I work with on staff or with another one of my mentors outside of the league, I have no shame in admitting that I don't have all the answers. So there's that piece. Like, I think the technical side of it is a little bit easier for me because you can just reach out and use your resources there. But when I do still struggle with the limiting belief side of it and using the tools that I know I have. I will say I'm better. You know, a couple few years ago, if one of them were to get triggered, I'd be in a hole for a week or two. Whereas
Mhm.
now it might be like a day.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
well, that's awesome. That's like, I guess that's the mindfulness of it, right? And the self-awareness piece. When you
yeah.
know yourself well like that, it really becomes a resource to be able
Hmm.
to kind of, as you say, right, manage your state and get the turnaround a lot quicker in your experience.
Yeah, and not being afraid of those emotions anymore, right? Like, if when I was a player, if I felt like I didn't know something or I didn't know the answer, I didn't know how to solve a problem, I was afraid of that because it meant that I wasn't good enough. Whereas, like, again, that thought of I'm not good enough, it still comes up, but I'm not afraid of it anymore to the point where I can't look at it honestly and go, okay, what's going on here? Do I actually not know what I'm doing? If so, okay, research it. Like, use your resources, ask some questions. Or is it just that there's a little piece of me that's afraid of not knowing all the answers? Okay, you're never going to know all the answers. So what's the first thing that you can do to help yourself feel a little bit better? That emotional intelligence piece and the awareness is huge and has
Mm,
helped me greatly.
I feel
mm,
like that's the biggest takeaway for our corporate leaders, right? It's like that mindfulness, that consciousness that interrupts the pattern and shows
Mhm.
us where the choice lives, right? In terms of it's it's totally normal to be triggered. That is the most human aspect
mhm,
of leadership is that we are all going to get triggered in our defense systems no matter what. We're all going to get triggered into our imposter syndrome the higher we climb in our performance ascension no matter what. But it's
Yeah.
understanding that we have choice in terms of how we respond
Yeah.
versus choosing to continue to stay in that reactive pattern of behavior that I feel like is the difference maker here. Lauren,
Hmm.
one last question before we let you go today. What do you feel like were the biggest lessons that you learned this year? And what do you feel like you're going to take with you moving into next season as a result of those lessons?
Um, well, that's such a good question. I think to stay on the topic that we've been on, I think the biggest lesson I've learned is that it doesn't matter how good you are or what level you're at, everybody gets defensive. Doesn't matter how expert you are or how expert other people are, we all get defensive and it comes up in different ways for folks. So, like, staying curious and not reacting to that defensiveness with your own sort of defensiveness or attacking behaviors is huge.
Mhm.
And then what was the other question? Sorry.
Yeah, in terms of how you're going to take all of that feedback, not failure, right,
Oh,
into
yeah.
your next season, and how is that going to inform kind of where you put your focus next year?
As I said earlier, like we're still figuring out how to utilize the mental performance side of it. So I really want to work on extending um the foundation of what we have in terms of our tools and how we utilize me as a mental performance coach in this setting.
Hmm.
So from the get-go of like, okay, how are we creating, these player development plans? We're already working on that now for the end of the year so that the players can take it into the off season. But then, what conversations are we having about how we want to continue to develop players, how we want them to start having conversations with themselves and their agents about what development they want to see. Team culture, like how do we want to talk about that? How do we want to keep it at the forefront and really creating more of a plan for mental performance? Whereas this year we kind of just approached it as like, we'll know when we need it and we'll fit it in where we can. I think having more of a plan for it will set us up for even more success. But yeah, I think like all of it is important. It's all data points on a map. And at the end of the day, we're all here. We're trying to win a Walter Cup. And I think this year has been really helpful for us as a staff and as a team to figure out what works and what works a little less. But yeah, it's been interesting, and I think there's a lot to take from it.
That's the legacy play right there for you,
Mm.
hey Lou,
Mhm. Oh
right?
yeah.
For sure, that's your sweet spot. That's what you bring to this coaching staff that differentiates you in terms of where you can add the most value because of everything that you spend your day job with us in the trenches with, right? And
Mhm.
it's just so shocking that we're still needing to advocate as hard as we are for the mental development piece in the context of leadership at this high level. But yeah, I definitely want to support you in seeing that realized in the lead because I feel like that is some of where we differentiate as females coming into this thing at the professional level as well. So very excited to see how all that plays out. Congratulations on your first year in the league. What a success it's been. We have to land this plane. So thank you everybody for tuning in. As a reminder, we're in the year of co-creation. So please, please, please reach out. Let us know how you enjoyed this episode. If there's anything else that you'd like to see us, ask Lulu next time she's in studio. Any of the topics that you would like to see us go deeper in, send me an email, susan@elitehighperformance.com. And for all our Leadership 2.0 offerings, including the many leadership development, mindset, high performance trainings that we do. We mentioned conflict management today, but we've got a whole slew of other ones. So go on over to the website, elitehighperformance.com, to check those out. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see everybody back here next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.